This video looks at Bandura, Ross and Ross's 1961 study testing the use of social learning theory. Now, in Bandura, Ross and Ross's 1961 study, they were testing the transmission of aggression through the imitation of aggressive role models. That was actually the title of the paper. Now, to do this, Bandura was testing social learning theory and whether that's an efficient way of how children learn aggression. Now, he wanted to see if children learnt through observation, imitation and reinforcement, and the study's general aim to see was whether children will imitate behaviour that they've observed, even if it's not been rewarded. The procedure, 72 children were used. There were 36 males and 36 females, all aged between 3 and 5. The participants were divided into 8 groups. There's a really helpful diagram to show you this on the next page. But there were 8 experimental groups of 6 children. So the remaining 24 children made up a control group. The children in all groups were all matched for physical and verbal aggression within ratings that were given from the experimenter and the nursery school teacher. Think evaluation point there. The children in the experimental group watched an aggressive or a non-aggressive role model of the same or of a different sex. So just to make this a little bit clearer, you can see on the screen that the 2 conditions were the aggressive adult model and the non-aggressive adult model, which made up the control group. And then the differences there was whether the child was female and whether they watched a female or a male model, and then whether the child was male and whether they watched a female or a male model. So they always had a control group to compare each different experimental group to in order to be able to see if there was a significant difference. Now, the children were individually brought in by an experimenter who invited in a model, and the children was placed in a corner and shown how to design a picture. Now, the adult model was taken to the opposite corner where a huge 5-foot Bobo doll already stood. Now, there were other toys around as well. There was a table, a chair, a mallet, and the experimenter left the room. So all the child could do was watch the model and overhear the experimenter tell the model that it was their play area and the child had no access to it. Now, the idea of this was to make the child a little bit irritated at the beginning. In the aggressive condition, the model played with the toys for a minute, but then started acting really aggressively toward the Bobo doll. In the non-aggressive condition, the model just continued to play with the other toys and didn't go up to the Bobo doll at all. Now, the physical aggression that was displayed by the model in the aggressive condition included things like punching the model, sitting on the doll, hitting its head with a mallet, throwing it across the air, kicking it, but it was also accompanied by these verbal phrases such as hit him down and kick him as he was doing it. And the pictures in the background, and I'll move the thing in a minute, are actually genuine pictures from this experiment. So in condition 1, which took place in room 1, which was the aggressive condition, the children were taken to the room with the toys in it and they were watched. The aggressive model came in and started acting aggressively toward the toys, as we've just talked about. In condition 2, I just like to play with these toys and not the Bobo doll, was the adult playing with the different toys because this was the non-aggressive condition. So as you can see on the screen, the Bobo doll is taken untouched. And after 10 minutes, the child was taken into the next room. After 10 minutes, the child was taken by the experimenter into room 2. And in room 2, this was the aggression arousal situation. So in this situation, the child was taken to a room with attractive toys such as fire engine, a colour top, a spinning top, and the child was told that that these toys in the room were the experimenter's best toys and they weren't allowed to play with them, they were only for other children. Then the observations of behaviour actually began in room 3. So in room 3, this is where the aggressive and the non-aggressive toys, along with the 3-foot Bobo doll, stood, and the child was left in the room for 20 minutes. Now, it was in this situation that the behaviour was rated by observers who were watching the children through a one-way mirror. Now, the 20 minutes was divided up into 245-second intervals, so that was the time sample that was used, and the child's behaviour was recorded at each interval. The children were obviously matched. We talked about this at the beginning. The same toys were available for every child in each room, and models had standardised behaviour. So every single condition with the model acting aggressively and non-aggressively, the behaviour and the verbal prods that we used were exactly the same. This is really important when you're considering the evaluation of this study. So the results findings are split into different sections. Firstly, watching an aggressive role model had a much greater effect in boys than girls, particularly when observing a same-sex model. Now, it's worth noting that the girls did imitate the aggressive behaviour, but the boys were much more so. All children exposed to an aggressive role model did display significantly more direct aggression than the children who watched the non-aggressive model. In general, it was the male model that had more influence than the female model. But both boys and girls displayed more aggression after observing the aggressive role model. It was much stronger after watching a model of the same sex, so it means that they were aggressive, but not in the exact same way that the models were. Boys are much more likely to imitate a same-sex model than a girl was. So, conclusions. The study shows that not all behaviour is shaped by reward and punishment, as operant conditioning suggests, because some behaviour is learned through observation which is later reproduced. Observing aggressive behaviour may weaken social inhibitors, particularly if the behaviour is performed by adults and observed by children, as in most cases, children look toward the adults as role models and those who know right from wrong. This study was particularly valuable because it didn't involve reinforcements of the model behaviour as it was later imitated, and the male model was imitated much more than the female model. The study has contributed greatly to the understanding of how children acquire behaviour through observing others. Now, further research has led to censorship and certification laws, which leads to a high applicability to society, because the study also highlights how non-aggressive role models in the media can encourage helpful behaviour. The observations of the children's behaviour are potentially subjective, yet there were a number of observers and they only shared agreed behaviours which were presented so that they ensured reliability was established. Bandura's study has clear practical implications for society, and it's been used to suggest that violence on television can be imitated, and has therefore led to things like the watershed being implemented across society, which means that really aggressive TV shows and films should only be shown after 9 o'clock. We should not expose children to aggressive models, and the fact that we should expose them to non-aggressive models, because this can have a really positive effect. All of Bandura's studies were conducted in a lab. It's actually an observation. It's really important that you remember that, but it was an observation that was structured and took place in a laboratory setting. Now, because it took place in a laboratory setting, we can argue that it was well controlled. There were lots of controls put in place, as we discussed all the way through, in terms of the matching of the sample. So it therefore means that this is a replicable study. Bandura actually replicated this a number of times himself. You need to know about 2 more of his replications. So it's therefore high in reliability. And by using an observational method, it means that the data collected is much more realistic, it avoids demand characteristics, and it means that the children were therefore acting in a valid way, so their behaviour was realistic. Also, there was more than one observer, as we mentioned before, so it ensured that the results had inter-rater reliability. Weaknesses, though. Although the experiment did take place in a familiar type of environment to the children, the conditions were not normal, so we can argue that the study does lack ecological validity, in the sense that the children may simply have been showing obedience to an adult, or they may have changed their behaviour because they were in an unfamiliar setting. All the children were from an American nursery, so it's unlikely that we can generalise the results beyond that sample, meaning it can be argued that it's ethnocentric or Eurocentric. The children were made to feel aggressive and probably quite distressed by the withdrawal of the toys, so exposing the children to an aggressive role model and effectively teaching them aggression is actually unethical. Please make sure that you watch the other 2 videos on Bandura's other 2 studies, so Bandura 1963 and Bandura 1965, because you need to know about all 3 of Bandura's studies in order to be able to answer questions on your exam.